It is believed that a crowded place is safer and the risk of being assaulted is significantly lower. Statistically, this is true, but nothing stops a criminal from luring his victim to a deserted place to do something terrible there. Today's story took place in Andria, Italy. It is a protected historical city with about 100,000 inhabitants. It is quite well known among tourists and attracts a large stream of visitors daily. For many locals, this enabled the establishment of a tourism-oriented transport business, whose income mostly comes from guests from other cities and countries. The tourist attraction in the city was the Castel de Monte, near which the Mansi family lived. The mother and father had an 8-year-old daughter named Graziella Mansi. She was their only child and a welcome addition to the family. They were the kind of tourism-oriented business people. The Mann family had owned their own market stall for about 10 years, where they sold nuts and dried fruits right on the street. They had a very advantageous location on the way to the castle's main gate. The business provided a good income. Although she was only 8 years old, Graziella often worked here helping her parents. She was oriented towards the family business from childhood, which made her very happy. The elders worked at one of the main thoroughfares. There was a constant stream of customers, which they couldn't always handle. The child's help was very useful, and the girl liked feeling part of the shared endeavor. She was friendly and active and was remembered by many who came to shop. August 19, 2000 was an ordinary Saturday with maximum tourist traffic. Weekend work was a familiar routine for the Mansi family. At such times, Graziella's grandfather was often behind the counter. The girl gladly accompanied him and ran errands. Normally, people streamed towards the castle, so the grandfather couldn't leave the stall. Around 10 o'clock, he once again asked his granddaughter for help. The older gentleman was tired in the evening and wanted to send his granddaughter to the fountain to fill a small bottle with water. Graziella gladly agreed. She set off towards the fountain. The journey there took 5 minutes, but Graziella was delayed, and her grandfather immediately became worried. He didn't want to leave the stall unattended and comforted himself with the thought that his granddaughter might have met someone she knew. So she was held up and delayed on her way back. But when more than 20 minutes had passed and the child still hadn't appeared, the man realized something was wrong. He decided to go to the fountain on his own to see what might have delayed the responsible Graziella. To his surprise, Mr. Mansi could not find the girl either on the path or near the fountain. The man searched all the surrounding streets, even going through them, but still couldn't find the child. It all seemed very suspicious to him. The grandfather went back to the stall hoping that Graziella had already returned there by a different route, but the girl wasn't there. About half an hour after the disappearance, he contacted the girl's son and mother and began calling friends and acquaintances whose numbers he knew. The parents did the same, but it turned out that no one had seen the schoolgirl. Finally, the whole family and some of Graziella's friends gathered in the square near Mansi's stall. Less than an hour later, adults and teenagers split into groups and set out to search for the child. The commotion was noticed by passers-by and even some tourists. Several people volunteered to join the search. The relatives prepared and took a photo of Graziella from the house to show people. Some reported seeing a girl that afternoon and evening who looked similar to the description. However, no one had any idea where she had gone or what had happened to her. It was a quiet, peaceful area where nothing usually happened. It was hard to imagine that someone could have assaulted the girl in such a busy place. After several hours of unsuccessful searching, the Mansi family went to the local police station. The family reported the child missing. The police officers were engaged by the case, and so the Carabinieri joined the search for the missing girl. A few hours after the disappearance, a police officer walking through the streets with one of the troops was approached by an eyewitness. According to him, he heard a disturbing child scream coming from a wooded area near Castel de Monte. 2 police officers went to the edge of this area and saw clouds of smoke rising from its center. They didn't believe this could have anything to do with the girl's disappearance, but decided to see what was going on. They should have found out what kind of fire it was and called the fire department. However, as the officers approached and the fire was only about a dozen meters away, they smelled a strange odor of burning flesh. The fire itself was not like an ordinary campfire. As they got closer, the carabinieri determined that dry leaves had been thrown into the fire, under which was something resembling a human body. The most frightening thing was that the corpse was the size of a child and the clothing exactly matched that of the missing schoolgirl. The police were almost certain that the corpse before them was that of the missing Graziella. The flames were consuming the girl's entire body. She was already burned when found, and she was dead. The forest was immediately searched. Some of the girl's clothing and a lighter, probably used to ignite the fire, were found, but nothing else pointing to the perpetrators. A more detailed examination was required. Furthermore, the authorities hoped for video recordings, of which there were several in the area around the castle. The medical examiner confirmed the investigators' suspicion that the deceased was Graziella, based on the autopsy results. The specialist was not yet able to fully answer the questions of the investigators and the girl's relatives. The body was in poor condition. Nevertheless, it was concluded that the child had been intentionally killed and set on fire. The news of this heinous case immediately spread through the media. As early as the next day, journalists began practically attacking the man's family. When the girl's relatives were informed about the incident, they initially didn't believe it was Graziella. This spontaneous act of cruelty seemed so abominable that the entire neighborhood was horrified. The media diligently spread rumors about the brutal murder that had occurred near the famous castle. The public was frightened by the incident. The influx of tourists significantly decreased due to this news. Visitors considered the area unsafe and were hesitant to visit the attraction, which significantly impacted the tourism industry in Andria. The investigators did not waste any time. From the beginning, the police officers set to work with great zeal. The main theory was an attack by a rapist who had lured the child away from the tourist route, where almost no one was, raped her, and then burned her to destroy all traces of his crime. Naturally, an 8-year-old child couldn't have made such dangerous enemies in her life, so it had to be a much older person. The authorities considered several possibilities. First, they looked at the list of registered sex offenders who might have been in the region at that time. However, this theory found less and less support as the investigation progressed. Even tourist flows were analyzed. It was not ruled out that the attacker was traveling and looking for random victims, one of whom was the innocent Graziella. Gradually, this possibility also seemed increasingly unlikely. The more the police spoke with witnesses, friends, and acquaintances of the man's family, the more the name Pasquale Tortora emerged. He was a young man in his early 20s, known throughout the neighborhood. He worked illegally as a handyman on the same street where the Mansi family's business was located. Many people noticed that as soon as Graziella came to help her family, Pasquale kept looking at her strangely. His gaze seemed disturbing. This fact was noticed by several people, which looked very suspicious. When the authorities spoke with Pasquale's friends, these fears were confirmed. Some of his buddies even claimed jokingly that the 20-year-old was seriously in love with an 8-year-old girl. But against the backdrop of events, the teenagers' jokes seemed much darker than they thought. Could Pasquale really be a predator who killed the girl he was obsessed with? His relatives denied such a possibility. He was raised in a decent family and had never been in trouble with the law, at least not until that fateful evening at Castel de Monte. Despite his family's assertions, Pasquale became the prime suspect. When the investigators met with him, the suspicions intensified further. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt with suspicious dark red stains and obvious traces of dirt, as if he had been digging in the earth. His face was scratched, suggesting a struggle. The scratches were superficial, and the investigators suspected they came from small children's hands. Pasquale himself, of course, denied being involved in the attack on the girl, but the more the investigators spoke with the young man, the more his story changed and became more serious. After just a few hours in the police office, Pasquale began to break down. Any doubts the investigators had vanished when the young man uttered a disturbing sentence. He said that he found Graziella very beautiful, even though she was an 8-year-old child. Furthermore, there were enough contradictions in the alleged murderer's accounts to suggest that the boy wanted to hide too much from the police. In one version, Pascual said that he came to the forest where the burning corpse was found while he was taking a walk and noticed the child without any signs of life. When he saw the corpse in flames, he got scared and ran away, after which the police appeared. Later, he added to the story that he noticed Graziella when she was going to the fountain to get water. He spoke to the girl, who was not afraid of him since she had seen him many times. Up to that point, he had always behaved calmly and appropriately. Pascal said that a female dog in the local forest had recently given birth to puppies and offered to show them to her. When the perpetrator finally came clean, he said he had lured the child into the forest and then set the corpse on fire because he wanted to erase the traces of the crime. The young man emphasized that he did not intend to rape the girl and that it was actually a sadistic game that simply got out of control. All these facts were eagerly spread by the media, which generously seasoned every news item with rumors and frightening details. All this caused confusion, but in fact, the true motive of the murderer was still unclear. After all these many contradictory statements, Pasquale's story was still not finished. The police wanted to hear the true version. There were numerous gaps in his words, obvious lies that did not match the evidence. He provided the Carabinieri with a chronology of events and other valuable information, but continued to evade many questions about the course of the attack itself and the motive for the crime. It was clear that the fire had broken out around 8 o'clock, but the child had disappeared almost 3 hours earlier. What had happened during that time? The motive for the arson was voices. Pasquale heard people walking near the forest. He was sure something was going on with the search for Graziella. The most cruel part of the whole thing was the medical examiner's report, which suggested that the girl was conscious and still alive at the time of the arson. The Carabinieri continued to pressure the suspect. It seemed strange that, given the scale of the atrocity, he had gotten away with only a few small scratches on his face. How could he handle the girl so easily? Doubts arose as to whether he had acted alone. Probably someone had helped him. It was decided to repeat the interrogation. Finally, Pasquale was willing to cooperate with the investigation and tell the whole truth, which he had been afraid of before. He said he had not lured the girl into the forest alone to rape or abuse her, but had been encouraged by a group of men aged 18 to 20. At that time, Jeep de Bari, Vincenzo Caradello, Domenico Margiotta, and Michele Zagaria were waiting for them in the forest. Pasquale claimed that no rape was planned or had taken place. He had had an argument with these young men which he lost. Allegedly, he was forced to pay. The buddies demanded that he lure the girl into the forest. There, all four attacked Graziella and abused her for several hours, not allowing her to leave the forest. They forced her to be silent, but when they heard the adults searching for the girl, they became scared. The whole crew was afraid of coming into conflict with the law, and so they decided to burn the girl. But they had no combustibles with them. The youths didn't feel like looking for gasoline, so they beat the girl until she lost consciousness. Then they tried to set her clothes on fire, but it wasn't enough. At that moment, Graziella regained consciousness and screamed, upon which the four young men beat her again until she lost consciousness. They threw leaves on the corpse and tried again to set it on fire with a lighter. Now the fire was ignited. All participants in this madness were between 18 and 20 years old. It is known that the young men were raised in decent families, not on the fringes of society, so their deeds seemed monstrous and incomprehensible. Everyone who knew this crew well described them as quiet and well-adjusted young people in whom they had never noticed cruelty or a taste for crime. The only one among them who had problems with the law had previously committed a petty theft. Therefore, the decision to burn the girl alive seemed unthinkable. After Pasquale told them about his friends, the police were able to easily arrest all the young men. This news shocked all of Italy. It spread through the media. When the suspects were arrested, they from the very beginning denied any involvement in Graziella's death and emphasized that they didn't know why the authorities were even interested in them. However, the investigators were determined to question them until they could finally find out what had happened that fateful evening in the forest. Unlike Pasquale, these young men had clean clothes and no scratches on their faces or bodies. During searches of their homes, nothing suspicious could be found. They continued to assert that while Pasquale Tadora harbored strange feelings for the girl, they themselves had nothing to do with the incident. Despite hours of interrogation, none of the suspects confessed to being involved in the crime. Therefore, they were simply released at this stage of the investigation. However, the young men remained in the sights of the authorities as potential suspects. It was also strange that the four young men were seen at the funeral, which took place before Pasquale's confession, carrying Graziella's coffin. They were seen crying as if they were truly mourning. When arrested, they stated that they were painfully aware of what had happened because they knew the girl, even though they had no contact with her. They had often seen Graziella at the Mansi family's business and thought she was very nice. The police officers suspected that their appearance at the funeral was not accidental. Although they didn't know the deceased's family well, the young men might have felt guilty and tried to atone for it in this way. Or they simply wanted to know the status of the investigation and whether they were encouraged to participate in the massacre. However, that day the ceremony attracted people from all over the city and even a few concerned tourists. So the four crying boys got lost in the crowd and didn't stand out. When they were all brought back for questioning, the suspects were addressed individually. Vincenzo and Giuseppe insisted they had an alibi. According to the young men's account, both were in a game club in the city around 7 p.m. on the day of the girl's disappearance. Michel and Domenico immediately refused to cooperate with the investigation. They didn't want to answer questions and demanded lawyers. This, of course, only increased the police's suspicion. At that point, the investigators could only check Vincenzo and Giuseppe's alibi and went to the club. The buddies were there, but they left the club after about an hour and couldn't provide a reliable alibi for another period of time. Consequently, they could have participated in the torture of the victim. Unexpectedly, Michel and Domenico confessed to the crime. They largely confirmed Pasquale Tordora's story. According to them, their friends had invited them to the forest in the evening to, as they put it, play with fire. When they arrived, it turned out that the rest of the company was already gathered. Pasquale had to bait the girl. Naturally, he chose Graziella, who, as many friends said, evoked strange feelings in him and could be an easy prey. The others simply hid behind the trees and waited for the victim to come with her tormentor. Pasquale confirmed again that he caught the girl near the fountain as she was drawing water and offered to show her the puppies born in the nearby forest. The 8-year-old naive girl had no idea that it could all end in beating and burning, so she was interested and agreed. He managed to deceive and seduce the child. Because Graziella loved animals very much and was delighted at the opportunity to see the little puppies. All the more, she trusted the familiar young man and did not expect such betrayal. The wooded area was located near the place where the criminal had caught his victim. It took them about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. By that time, the grandfather should have already been actively searching for his granddaughter. When they arrived at the specified spot, the other criminals jumped out of their hiding places. Graziella was horrified. Probably at that moment, the girl realized she had fallen into a trap, but it was too late. The child had nothing to oppose her tormentors. The young men were slightly drunk and continued drinking. For some reason, they were very amused by the fact that the girl was so frightened. According to the suspects, they did not intend to rape her but only wanted to play with the defenseless girl and make fun of her. Graziella was so frightened that she was actually in shock. At some point, one of them overestimated their strength. She fell and hit her head on a stone, after which she lost consciousness. According to the youths, burning Graziella was not initially planned. They wanted to tie her up to scare her even more. But when she fell and lost consciousness, it brought everyone back to reality. They thought the girl was dead and panicked. At the same moment, they heard voices and were afraid that they were searching for the girl. Probably due to the alcohol intoxication in their inflamed brains, the idea came to them that it was necessary to destroy all traces of the crime, and for this purpose, fire would be perfect. The suspect's statements were partially confirmed. In particular, the forensic examination revealed no clear evidence of rape. The victim was wearing underwear, although there were injuries to the genitals, which may not have been due to rape but to attempted violence. On the other hand, the condition of the remains was extremely poor. It could not be ruled out that the child had not only been tortured but also raped. However, it was impossible to confirm this because the body was severely burned. The Carabinieri suspected that part of the evidence might have been destroyed by fire. As the boy's companions had hoped, the story itself seemed far-fetched. The authorities looked for ways to confirm, given the injuries on the victim's body, that it was a heinous child rape. The prisoners, meanwhile, continued to insist that it was an accident. It was decided to finally let the court decide the fate of the juvenile offenders. 2 members of the company never confessed to the crime. Vincenzo and Giuseppe confessed that they had only come to the forest because Pasquale had called them. They had no idea what the game with fire meant and were shocked by what had happened. According to their own account, they quickly left the forest because they didn't want to be there. But these young men also had no idea how this dangerous game could end. They were simply afraid to report to the police because they feared either retaliation from the others or trouble with the law, which would inevitably come if they were accused of complicity. Despite all the contradictions in the story, Pasquale Tortora received the mildest sentence at the end of the trial. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. There were 2 main reasons for this. The first was the confession. Among the perpetrators, he was the first to willingly cooperate with the investigation. Second, no matter how many tests the investigators conducted, everything always indicated that it was not Pasquale who lit the fire on the child's corpse. Although he actively participated in the abuse of the victim, the investigators were sure that the corpse was disposed of by the other 4. The other perpetrators were found guilty of kidnapping, child abuse, and intentional murder and were sentenced to the highest possible penalty. They all received life sentences in solitary confinement. It was clear that they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars without contact with other prisoners. Graziella's mother fainted when the verdict was announced. Her husband supported her. The families of the accused argued openly, and the victims' relatives believed that the perpetrators got what they deserved, with the exception of Pasquale, who received too light a sentence for luring their child into the forest and sentencing her to death. Vincenzo and Giuseppe were most outraged by the harsh verdict. They continued to insist on their innocence so vehemently that they even managed to find supporters who believed their story. But it didn't help them, and they could not appeal the verdict. 8 years have passed since these events. Vincenzo Carrel decided at the age of 27 to voluntarily take his own life out of hopelessness or guilt for his actions. During this time, he was in prison and managed to smuggle a rope from his bathrobe into his cell, with which he took his own life. A few days earlier, his mother had come to the prison to visit him. The woman continued to believe in his innocence and fully supported her son. But Vincenzo himself had at that moment almost completely lost the will to live. Although he was still alive, the woman felt that Vincenzo was no longer with her, and her maternal feelings were not deceived. On June 19, 2013, Michel's lawyer applied for a retrial due to some judicial errors. He was dissatisfied with the result, but the court rejected the application. Pasquale's mother publicly addressed the Mansi family and apologized for what her son had done. She believed that he should pay for his actions to the full extent of the law. Graziella's mother did not accept this apology and reacted rather harshly, stating that Pasquale should at least live through everything that happened to her daughter. If he hadn't lured her into the forest, the girl would still be alive. Therefore, Graziella's parents blamed Pasquale for everything. The name of Graziella Mans is still on everyone's lips in Italy. Near Castel de Monte, there is a small gravestone with her name and photo, as well as a summary of the life story of this little girl, which ended so tragically. Here, locals and tourists often lay flowers and toys. More often, of course, this place is visited by the girl's relatives. 24 years after the tragedy, Pasquale Tortora was released from prison. His sentence was reduced by 6 years for good behavior. He is now years old and has decided to start his life anew. Whether he will succeed is hard to say. He was the only one from the entire company who was convicted in an abbreviated procedure that allowed for a milder sentence. Immediately after the incident, the two stopped being friends, and their relationship was not restored even until Pasquale's release. Pasquale claims that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what happened and the suffering he caused Graziella and her family. If Pasquale could return to that day, he would not have committed the crime. His family helped him get through this difficult time and come to his senses. He thanks everyone who gave him a chance for a new life. The mother of little Graziella commented on Pasquale's early release. The woman claims that with his release, the sense of justice has disappeared. She believes that such people do not change and pose a danger to society, especially since they do not deserve a second chance. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, who proclaim their innocence, do not understand why Pasquale did this to them. When Vincenzo voluntarily said goodbye to life, he wrote a suicide note in which he also insisted on his innocence and expressed anger at the injustice that had befallen them. He entrusted the confirmation of this fact to a caring person in the future and refused to continue the meaningless struggle for his freedom. Guy Domenico and Miche are still in isolation. Giuseppe continues to insist on his innocence. He spends his time reading the Bible, accepts his sentence, and does not try to challenge the court's decision. At the same time, he firmly believes that he will be released from prison as soon as his complete non-involvement in the murder of the girl is proven. His lawyer, his family, and he himself devoutly believe in the innocence of Giuseppe and the deceased Vincenzo. All three continue to claim that Pasquale is the main person responsible for the tragedy. It was he who not only lured the girl into the forest, but also brutally tortured, raped, and burned her. Their statements are confirmed by the fact that only on Pasquale's body were traces of a struggle found. The girl's scratches, as well as dirt and her blood on his clothing. All the others were unscratched and clean. Nevertheless, Pasquale received the least possible sentence and is already free. If you liked the video, please give it a like. That helps a lot with distribution. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.